Once you have selected and organized the items you want your team to measure, actually conducting the experiment goes pretty quickly. You go into Sigma Excel, Measurement System Analysis, Basic MSA Templates, and select Gauge R&R Study. Up will come a template that you can fill out. This template handles up to 10 parts, up to 3 operators, and each operator can measure each part up to 3 times. The minimum you can do would be 2 operators with 2 readings each, and you could use less than 10 parts if you wanted, but it's really recommended that you use 10 parts, 3 operators, and 2 or 3 readings. So the way this would work is you would bring your first operator up to the hot seat, and you're going to have your 10 parts selected that you want them to measure. You will hand them each of those parts in random sequence. Why random sequence? Well, they're going to measure each part multiple times. If every time they came up to the hot seat to measure something, you handed them part number 1 first, they would remember what that measurement was, and they would tend to tell you the same thing. Because all of the parts should roughly look the same that they're going to be measuring, they don't know which part you are giving them. So you might hand them part number 7 first, then hand them part number 3, then part number 8, etc. And as they measure each item, you will then click in here and enter their response. Now remember, these parts were selected so that you have roughly 1/3 of them being at the high end of the scale, 1/3 being at the low end of the scale, and about 1/3 in the middle. So we don't expect the readings for all of these parts to be the same for parts 1 through 10. However, on repeated measurements, you would hopefully see the same measurement, because they should be measuring the same part in exactly the same place, in exactly the same way each time they do it. So operator A comes up, takes their 10 measurements, and then they go out for a soda. You bring operator B up, they take their 10 measurements, you record those, and they go do some emails. Operator C comes up, they take their 10 measurements, and off they go. Then you bring back operator A. They do another 10 measurements for you until everyone has been completed. Once you have all the measurements from all the operators, then you will have something that looks like this. We have this filled in. In this case, we had 3 operators, 10 parts, 2 measurements each. And as you scroll down, it automatically creates the statistics that you want to see. In this case, our gauge R&R number, a percent total variation, is above 30%. The guidelines you learned in the book are universal. Greater than 30% is a red light, less than 10% is a green light, in between is a yellow light. The software highlights this in blue so you know which number to look at. Here we have a bad measurement system. It is above 30. So we now look at the reproducibility and repeatability statistics, and the 10%, 30% rule does not apply to those, but you do look to see whether you have numbers in there that are bad or not. Good numbers would be single-digit numbers or fractional numbers like a 0.8 or even a 0. In this case, we have higher numbers, and it tells us that reproducibility is a bigger issue than repeatability. To figure out where things went wrong in the experiment, we go back up to the session window, and you can see that for part number 2, for example, everyone who measured that gave you a different answer every time. This is very curious. What is the deal with part number 2? Why is it different every time? I encourage teams to videotape their experiment. If this were the case, we could play back the videotape, and maybe that provides some clues as to why part 2 is so hard to measure. If you take a look at part 7 by comparison, you'll see that we were fairly consistent in measuring part 7. Most people said 1.52. You'll also notice that nowhere on this sheet does it address accuracy. We're not saying that 1.52 is the correct answer for part 7. We're just saying that operator A was perfectly repeatable for part 7, and 1.52 is the most popular answer. To figure out whether it was accurate or not, you would have to compare the operator's average answers to the known correct answer. Also, when we're looking at repeatability, you might focus in on operator B. You'll notice on parts 1 and 6, operator B was perfectly repeatable. Every time he measured it, he gave you the same answer. But for the other parts, he was not repeatable. He's giving you different answers each time he measures those. So when you conduct a study like this, the percent total variation number tells you whether you've got a green light or a red light. If you got a green light, take your team and start collecting data. If you don't, then you'll look back through the session window like we just did, trying to find clues as to what went wrong and where it went wrong. Once you found that, you might employ tools like the technique of 5 whys. You might use a cause and effect diagram. What went wrong with our measurement system to cause this repeatability and reproducibility situation? Maybe people didn't understand the operational definition. Maybe they understood it, but they weren't following it. Maybe there was a problem with the measuring device. Maybe someone forgot their glasses. They could measure the big parts really well, but they couldn't measure the smaller parts. You never know what goes wrong exactly because it varies case by case in any one of these MSA experiments. Once you figured this out, you try to make some corrections and then quickly rerun the experiment, and hopefully your percent total variation turns out to be much better. We would like a number under 10%, which would be a green light and a good indication that you can trust the data that comes from this particular tool. Good luck with your experiment.